The movie actually opens with Harper watching the suicide of her husband. They were estranged but married, James. Now the thing of it is, you'll notice that the movie never tells you why they're angry. Something happens though to trigger James's response to Harper, which is to say he hit her. Now that's not to say there's any justification for hitting anyone, but at the same time, some events can trigger a violent response. And what Alex Garner very cannily and deliberately didn't answer is why James and Harper's marriage was falling apart. He skated around that deliberately because Harper was having an affair. Harper was having an affair with Riley. Riley was her best friend who appears via iPhone, except for at the end of the movie where she turns up in person. With the secular interpretation of this movie, everything you see that's supernatural is not, because you're viewing the movie through the eyes of Harper. Harper is the epitome of an unreliable narrator, and she, being Harper, does not like men. And she's in fact angry at men. This is why when she goes to the village to get away from the situation of her husband's death, all the men look the same. All the men are mean and cruel, because that's the way she views men now, you see. So she witnesses all sorts of weird, bizarre things happening. These are manifestations of this hatred, this anger directed at men. And what do these manifestations do, besides being oftentimes cruel? They embody not only the masculine, but the feminine. Essentially, what Harper is saying to herself is that men, behind their bravado, behind their strength, behind their anger, want to be able to create life, and they can't. And it frustrates them at their core. And this is what drives their anger. It's an anger based on her just being a woman. Nothing more and nothing less. On some primal level, they hate her for it. They hate that they contribute, relatively speaking, so little to the process of life. It's something that, no matter how powerful a man is, he cannot do. And they despise her for it. And so, every man Harper meets looks like the same man. Because in her mind, all men are the same. Now, she's dealing with these feelings, this rejection of not only her former marriage, but of the life she once knew. And so, the movie is a war between those two impulses. But the impulse towards lesbianism wins out at the end when her lover appears, who's pregnant, by the way. And do you recall I mentioned that Harper was communicating with Riley via her iPhone while she was awake? Did Riley once mention the pregnancy? Pregnancy is a significant event in women's lives. Fact that she didn't mention the pregnancy at all, not even once. Now keep in mind though, it's also worth mentioning that the call was sometimes cut off. But that doesn't change the fact that the pregnancy was not mentioned. Now the question is, why was it not mentioned? As I said, I'm willing to wager that pregnancy is a major event in the lives of women, particularly if they are actually pregnant. But Riley never mentions it once. Why does she not mention it? Beyond the fact that the child is going to be brought up by Riley and Harper, the fact is that Riley didn't need to mention the pregnancy at all because Harper was well aware of it, being that she is co-parenting that child with Riley. This is what set James off. This is why James killed himself. Because think about it for a second. How often do you hear about a man killing himself over a divorce? I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm saying it's relatively rare. The fact that this is happening implies something remarkably traumatic to his psyche, or more accurately speaking, to his ego. And that is that Harper is going to leave him. And not leave him for another man. He could actually live with that, I suspect, but leave him for another woman. Now let's look at a non-secular explanation for why events could be unfolding as they did in men. Let's assume that all the supernatural events we see in the movie are real, unlike the secular explanation. That being the case, you have a deity, a wood god, if you will. And this being is drawn to the vulnerability, the pain it feels in Harper. Pain it can't quite interpret because it's not a woman. It doesn't understand. And so what this being, this entity, tries to do is understand. And so it understands by trying to create life. But this being doesn't know how to do that, which implies that the duplicates, literally every male that we meet in this village, was not created in this fashion because it fails, because men do not have the ability to create life. It is beyond them. Even a deity like this wood god, who's also a Marvel character, by the way, cannot create life. And it angers them, it frustrates them that so much is within its reach, within its power. But what isn't is the ability to create life. So it reveals itself to Harper. It wants to show, I can do this too. You aren't the only one who can do this. But it fails and fails and fails again because that is not the purview of man. That is entirely the purview of woman. Men contribute what's fairly obvious. Sperm, that's it. No more man is needed, frankly. At least in terms of the literal reproductive act. So, as I mentioned earlier, this entity is drawn to Harper's pain, her trauma, and it manifests itself in James. But you'll notice something. At the end of the movie, James does not still take any accountability whatsoever for his own death. Harper's always the problem. Despite being born of what is a god, he cannot move beyond his own mortality. All he can do is to blame Harper. So those are two interpretations of Men by Alex Garland. This is ScreenFiles.com and review. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like or a follow.